Hello, everyone, and welcome to the recorded portion of the press conference. It is May 6, 2021, and we are here excited to rock and roll. We've been doing a lot of good sharing up until now. I would like to jump in and share a bit about building off of what I sent out an email last night. I was up till late at night, actually early morning hours here. I was so inspired and continue to be. So I'm going to share about that. The first thing is, well, there's so much to share, so I'll just take it in parts. The first part is kind of like a framework for the topic space that we're developing for the Chrysalis calendar. And the first thing I want to say is that the framework that I'm going to propose is just one of an infinite number of possible frameworks. And, I'm not saying this is the one. Oh, everyone listen to this framework and believe it or whatever. Nothing of the sort. Please come with your own framework or modifications to what I'm about to put on the table or something totally different or whatever you feel like. But the idea is, so the big idea is framework, not this specific framework, but just framework, right? Think of it like a taxonomy of topics. And so at the highest level, I'd like to propose, so I'll just give my specific framework that I'm all excited about. So feel free to take it in and imagine into it. But let me start with a little bit of screen sharing. An image that actually Michael Gaio came up with, but wait a second, it says screen sharing is, oh, I see, I have to make myself co-host, that's right. Okay, here goes. All right, okay, Michael Gaio came up with this image per my specifications, actually some time ago. Goodness, it was almost 4 years ago. It's amazing how time flies. Anyway, but here is the basic image. And for some reason, okay. Let me try that again. Sorry about the delay. But it's, wait a second, almost there. Thanks for your patience, everyone. So the image is, it's a series of images, and the idea that I want to convey here is the idea of what are all the needs that we need to be responsible for, right? For people and for the planet. And so I start off with this notion of a whole world, a simple and idealistic notion of one world, a whole world, and what does it take for our world to be whole? And as soon as I bring the topic into talking about parts, there's a part of me that resists that, and you may find some resistance in yourself that says, wait a second, we shouldn't be breaking it into parts at all. But the idea is not to break anything into parts, it's just to look at it from different perspectives. So what if we considered the perspective that we could look at fundamentally two perspectives for starters, and of course there's an infinite number of perspectives, but imagine we started off by saying, okay, let's consider wholeness for people, for humanity, as Guy McPherson likes to say, our favorite species, Homo sapiens. So wholeness for people, and then wholeness for the planet, basically the planet beyond humans, right? So it's one way to kind of, it's a divisional sort of perspective, but again, we're just looking at perspectives here. And then if we were to look at, well, what does that mean? Let's break it down. What does it mean to have wholeness for people? And we could further break that down into, physical needs, and, one could say higher needs or social spiritual needs or whatever, right? So our physical needs are the obvious ones I've listed in bullets there: food, shelter, et cetera, et cetera. And then higher needs for community, for culture, for purpose, for story, et cetera, right? And then likewise, wholeness for the planet. and the different facets of wholeness. We need wholeness for the atmosphere, for the oceans, for water, for land, for ecosystems, all species, et cetera, et cetera. So for example, even for each of the billions of species, you can imagine a similar breakdown as we see on the left. What exactly do they need, right? So the following slide is just really more of an artistic one. It's not meant to be correct or certainly not complete, but you can imagine continuing to break this down and break it down and break it down until we get to very fine-grained details. If you think of it as an inverted tree, what are the extrema of the tree? Leaves. So you can imagine this being broken down all the way down to what we could call leaf node needs. And so you can imagine, trillions or hundreds of trillions of leaf node needs down to the needs of every last species, and say, okay, we need to fulfill all these needs for the world to be whole, right? The fact that species are going extinct is a reflection of the fact that we're not meeting the needs of these species. That's an understatement, right? So what if we were to actually, in a holistic way, meet the needs of all species, all ecosystems, all life-supporting systems like water and air, oxygen, rivers, streams, et cetera, soil, et cetera, what would that mean? What would it look like? So I just want to start off with this idea of, think of a vast structure of the needs of a whole world and broken down into very, very specific needs. So now I'm going to get ready to draw some pictures here. Whenever I would have trouble understanding something, my father, the late John Shively, would sometimes say, Jamin, do I need to draw pictures? Well, yeah, Dad, sometimes we do need to draw pictures. So let's draw some pictures here. Here, let me get ready to screen share some pictures. So here goes. Okay. Building off of this idea. So I'm now going to show a picture of what I just talked about conceptually. So imagine now that we have this whole dimension called needs. Needs of what? Of a whole world. I'll just put WW for whole world. And so, you can imagine that I'm going to now turn that taxonomy upside down. Let's say we start with whole world here, people, planet, et cetera, ... breaking it down into its parts and parts and parts. And let's just say we continue along that journey of breaking it down into its parts. You could think of this whole thing as a taxonomy, borrowing from the term originally from biology, from Linnaeus. But anyway, just imagine, just conceptually here, that we now have this whole axis broken down into all these specific, measurable, quantifiable, analyzable needs, right? And that's this whole axis, needs of a whole world, right? And I'm going to give myself a little more space here on the left. Okay. And this is all very conceptual. And then imagine we have this other axis here, which is, I'll just call it assets, right? So, if my plant needs water and I have a pitcher of water, that pitcher of water is an asset. And then I pour the water onto the plant, depleting it from the pitcher, adding it to the soil of the plant. So imagine we have all these assets over here. And so conceptually, we take from here, let's say water in a pitcher, and we contribute it to the soil of a plant, for example, right here. All right, so that's an example of an asset being applied to meet a need. Now imagine that we have this, that we kind of create a whole matrix out of this. For every one of these assets, we draw a horizontal bar or row. For each of these needs, we create a vertical column. And the idea, again, all very conceptually, just imagine filling in this whole matrix. We can say, okay, for this particular need right here, I'll just fill it in with a color. Imagine that this need is being fulfilled by this asset, and this asset over here, this asset over here, this asset over here, fulfilling this need here, right? Is everybody following me? Is that clear? Okay, good. And so likewise, we could imagine, filling out this entire grid, this entire matrix with all of these relationships. And we could, economists do this sort of thing at a macro level, notably Leontief, the famous Russian, who kind of came up with the concept of the Leontief matrix, Leontief coefficients. But anyway, the idea is to map assets to needs. What assets are currently being used to fulfill what needs? Okay. Now, I'm going to go off screen share for a minute so we can see each other. Currently, what's happening, right? Currently, humans we're kind of out of control. We're chopping down forests, setting fire to forests, enslaving animals, raping those animals, killing those animals, eating their meat, stealing their milk from their babies, so that we can meet not actual needs, but perceived needs. I want to live in a big mansion, live the American dream, and I want a bunch of cars, gas-guzzling SUVs, and gas-guzzling boats, and gas-guzzling helicopters, so that I can feel big and sexy and whatever the hell else. These are not real needs. We're living this insane omnicidal fantasy of dominion, domination, greed, ego. These are not real needs. These are made up needs. And we've taken it to such an extreme. Bill Gates is commissioning a $500 million yacht, probably the biggest private yacht in the world, because he needs to feel big, right? I grew up in the same neighborhood as that Bill Gates grew up in, and I can tell you that this is in Northeast Seattle. It's a very toxic culture. There's a lot of bullying, putting down. Bill Gates grew up as this, not very physical, slender little kid, and he got pushed around, and now he's pushing back, right? So he's dealing with his childhood trauma in a very sick way, destroying ecosystems so he can feel big and powerful and important, right? And it's never enough being the rich. I worked for him. I worked for him at Microsoft, so I know who I'm talking about. I'm not revealing any secrets that aren't published or anything like that. I wouldn't do that. So just speaking in general terms, we are one sick species. And so we're meeting the wrong needs, right? And so our Leontief matrix of applying, oh, sweet, Derek's joining. Okay, let me just pause for a minute so I can welcome Derek, get his blessing to record. All right. I've been screen sharing here, and we've been talking about this very basic concept that you could think of the needs of a whole world, right? You could think of like breaking down the needs of a whole world into humanity's needs, and I'm just going to call it the needs of the rest of the world, all other species, ecosystems, etc., as if we could separate ourselves, right? Which we can't and don't want to, but at least for purposes of analysis, let's imagine that we create this whole taxonomy of needs of people and planet and represent that whole taxonomy on this axis here, needs of a whole world, okay? And then with what are we going to meet those needs? Assets. What are the assets? Well, the assets are the assets of a whole world, okay? So we're using the assets of a whole world to meet the needs of a whole world. And I was simply making the point a minute ago. I mean, you could do this as a whole matrix and get very analytical about it and say, like, for example, this need right here in this, represented by this blue column, is being met by this asset over here, and this other asset over here, and this other asset over here, and we could get very analytical about it and assign numbers and quantities and all that. And that's just and I'm just going to call this the assets needs matrix, or the needs assets matrix, okay? And I made a very simple point about this, which is that we humans have taken over the planet. We're destroying the planet in service of some very artificial needs, some artificial perceived needs that we each need to live the American dream and have a big mansion and lots of gas guzzling vehicles, cars, boats, helicopters, etc. We need to travel. We need to eat meat and drink milk and live a certain lifestyle. And we're consuming the assets of a planet in a very unsustainable way, in a very non-regenerative way, and in fact, an omnicidal way. We're killing everything in the process. And so a lot of the sustainability conversations basically say, okay, you know, human needs are a constant. We certainly can't mess with those. How do we meet those needs in an incrementally more sustainable way, like with, you know, electricity generated from a different source? I believe and I maintain that we need to transform not just the assets part of the assets and needs matrix, but the needs themselves. We need to transform the entire matrix, the entire set of relationships between needs and the assets used to meet those needs, to achieve a whole different world where we are meeting the needs, yes, meeting the needs of humans, but also of all other species, the koala bears, the pollinators, et cetera, in a way that is regenerative. So yes, we're breathing in the air, but we're also planting trees. So we're consuming oxygen and replenishing the sources of that oxygen at the same time. For example, we're eating plants instead of enslaving and killing animals and decimating the Brazilian rainforest in order to grow more beef, et cetera, et cetera. So eating plants in a regenerative, sustainable way, and so on and so on. So that's just kind of a big picture. This is all part of a larger conversation, which is about creating a structure, a taxonomy of topics for the Chrysalis calendar. And I'm calling this taxonomy of topics a Chrysalis map, a topic map, right? And so I'm saying at the heart of this whole transformation is this fundamental structure. And by the way, I'm just proposing this structure as a structure, not as the structure, right? So let lots of different structures be proposed. It's all good. This is just one. And it starts with this needs assets matrix, okay? And then I'm going to talk about transforming our needs and transforming our relationship to the assets of the world. But first, let me pause and see if there's any questions or comments before I go deeper.
Please, may we have the Reader's Digest version? Thank you.
The Reader's Digest version. Okay, so the Reader's Digest version, let me screen share here again. The Reader's Digest version is that here we are, people and planet, and we all have a bunch of needs. Humans have needs, koala bears have needs, mahogany trees have needs, pollinators have needs. And then we have the world as assets. See, people and planet, this is just one way of breaking down the world. The world as assets, it's another way of breaking down the world. So the Reader's Digest version of this is, it's kind of like one representation of the world relating to another representation of the world as assets relating to the world as needs. And so I'm just kind of creating this simple like table that basically says, okay, if we were to break this down, very fine grain. So any slice here really breaks down into millions of little tiny slices across both dimensions. How do we create at a very detailed level this mapping of this relationship between assets and needs, right? And all I'm saying
May I jump in for a moment here,
please,
Jamin?
please, yes, please, Eric, go ahead.
As always, I'm going to be the bringer of skepticism. That's sort of my job, right?
Yes.
I like that. I like the idea, like as a way of like this matrix of assets and needs. I like the idea, but the problem with it is every single thing on this planet is an asset to something or other, right? There is not an atom on this planet which is not an asset to something or other. Equally, there are, I don't know how many millions of species of living things, but a lot of millions of species of living things. And so to actually map this thing and to do this as a detailed map you're essentially creating an infinite map, right? There are an infinite number of cross-referencing points on there. So, any actual construction of this map beyond a way of conceptualizing this phase space you've created, right? This two-dimensional phase space you've created using assets and needs as the two dimensions. I think it's a good way of conceptualizing it, but I think it might have limited usefulness as an actual map, if you see what I mean.
Oh, totally. And I'm using it mostly in a conceptual way at this point.
Yeah.
I'm not actually
As that it has some
suggesting.
power.
Yeah, I'm not actually suggesting. Go ahead.
Sorry, is Michael, my experience of getting at the assets is to write a 45-page grant request, you know what I'm saying? So I'm just saying there are challenges, but they are doable. They are doable.
Oh, and Derek, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say hi to Fiona. I noticed Fiona's on the call. I just wanted to say hi to Fiona and to oh God, I'm so sorry, I've forgotten your
Horatio.
Horatio, that's it. I'm so sorry, mate, I forgot.
Horatio,
nice
Fiona.
to see you both. And welcome home, Horatio. Welcome home.
Yeah, thank you. I have to quarantine now with Fiona.
Yeah, there's worse places you could be doing it, right?
Yeah, one day is gone, 9 to go. And then back to my boys.
Yeah. Carry on.
Awesome. Welcome, Horatio, Fiona. Derek, yes, brother, go for it.
Yeah, so first, what I would like to say first is, this place that I am right now, I can be, thankful enough for, this opportunity to be in this space, to have this conversation, because this conversation is actually one that is really, deterministic to the outcomes of what, our world is going to be looking like in the next, few years to come. So with the proposition that you've made, it's actually very, very doable, in the sense that when I take a look at the document that you drafted in the email that you sent, that was the whole word taxonomy. When we see wholeness for people, on one side, and wholeness for the planet, and then you break that down, you see we have physical needs, we have food, shelter, wellness, clothing, etc. Then we have social, spiritual needs, we have community, culture, story, purpose, etc. Then we have the planet, the wholeness for the planet, where we have air, water, land, ecosystem, species, etc. Now, how I would like to break this down is that all these things that you've drafted in your document, we could group all of them into what we call the 8 forms of currency, or 8 forms of capital, right? There are 8 forms of capital. Now, what we have here, we have cultural capital, we have spiritual capital, we have living capital, we have social capital, we have experiential capital, we have financial capital, we have material capital, and we have intellectual capital. Now, how I'll break down this in the form that they are, when you take capital, for instance, a capital will have to have a currency, right? And that currency would have to complex to what make that capital, or what came together to form that currency. Now, when you take social capital, the currency for social capital is connections, right? And connection complex to influence and relationships. When you take material capital, the currency for that is materials, natural resources. And what that complex to is tools, buildings, and infrastructure. When you take financial capital, what that, the currency for that is money, right? And what is money complex to? Financial instruments and securities. When you take living capital, you have the currency for living capital being carbon, nitrogen, water, etc. And that complex to soil, living organisms, land, ecosystems, services, right? We have intellectual capital, that's ideas, knowledge, complex to words, images, intellectual property, right? We have experiential capital, that's the currency for that is action. And that complex to the embodiment in experience and wisdom, right? And knowledge. Then we have spiritual capital. The currency for that is prayer, intention, faith, and karma. Somebody's prayers and intentions towards you could, give you some benefit in life. And the complexity of all this currency, all, are embodied in what you call spiritual attainment. Now we have cultural capital to be the last. And the currency for that are songs, stories, rituals. And this all complex to what we have as community. Now, if you take the whole world into consideration, we all depend on one thing. All these forms of capital depend on one thing for survival, which is the sun, right? The sun is our star, the star for Earth. And every single living thing and non-living thing that you could see here on Earth, depends on the sun's, energy to, come to life or, come to life. Buildings won't come to life if you don't have the sun out there to shine on them for you to see that this is a building. So with all these things that I've just mentioned and broken down, these are, the things that we are going to be drafting, or the currencies that we're going to be drafting this proposal that you just mentioned for people, needs, and assets. So that's just what I'll add for now. But as the conversation goes on, I think, there's a lot more to come. Thank you.
My goodness, brilliant, Derek. I don't think I've heard such a concise encapsulation of the different forms of capital, currencies, and attainment expression ever. So I'm so happy you're here, Derek. Thank you. And look forward to all your contributions. Just brilliant.
It's a very cool idea, though, overlaying the notion of currencies onto this assets needs things, right? Because it sort of connects them, doesn't it? And if there was, I mean, this is another one of those sort of pipe dream things, but if there was some way of instantiating some of those more esoteric currencies that Derek has just gone through, right? There was some way of actually making them more visible, right? The currency of trust, for example, the social currency of trust. There was some way of making that more visible so that those who were most worthy of trust gained status, rather than those that were best able to play the game of hoarding money gained status, right? But those who were best able to exemplify the embodiment of trust, that sort of thing. I mean, I have no idea how you go about doing this, but if these currencies could be made more real, more physically real, that might go a long way.
Yeah, if a person has good thinking, both of you, I really appreciate. But if a person has like 450 friends on a very popular platform, hey, there's 450 people that person's interacted with, for example. Does that deserve trust? Possibly. I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, some kind of trust online. It's pretty simple to organize some kind of system of trust tokens, right? Where people's contributions and posts and comments and things like that, can be given, and they can accumulate those tokens, right? And you can see how many trust tokens they've accumulated. The problem with all of these algorithmic type systems is that they can be gamed, right? Those that would seek to gain status for the sake of status will figure out ways to game these systems sooner or later. That's kind of the, so We always
Yeah,
end up coming back to this point, right? But personal transformation is always such a huge key to this, right? Bad players. It doesn't take too many bad players to corrupt the entire system for everybody.
I agree. It's like the Kardashian family getting too many likes. You know, it's like they're gaming the system for all their attention and their media attention. Yeah, let's say. Thank you, Kardashians, for all you do. Whatever that is, right? You know what I'm saying?
So, you know, thank you for that contribution. Now, to give maybe just a little bit of lateral, you know, understanding to, you know, the breakdown that I just made, when you are trying to find how the connection between all these forms of currency work in the world today is basically, you know, it's already been, you know, being done in the sense that all these forms of capital that I mentioned about are being, you know, exchanged for just one thing, which is money, right? And in the world that we live in today, is all circulated around, you know, the concept or, you know, money, or owning the form, owning the financial form of capital is the only form that is being held up high, in a sense that in the economy that we all depend on is structured around financial capital, in a sense that the one who possesses more financial capital have access to the rest of these 7 forms of capital. But then that's not how it's supposed to work, right? In the system that German is proposing. In the system that German is proposing, how this is going to work is we are reversing the engine, in the sense that if I possess one form of capital, that form of capital is as valuable as the next, right? So this is how the contrast works. I'm currently working on a project around a token that I'm building based on sun energy. It's solar backed. But then take this token for example, right? If I have access to social capital, and social capital, the currency for that is connections, right? And I've managed to tokenize the connections that I have into, you know, this particular currency or this particular token that I have. And German has, you know, a currency that he possesses, which is, you know, a material capital, right? That is natural resources, tools, buildings, infrastructure. And he also tokenized this into the system. What will happen is I will be able to, you know, trade the connections that I have that are going to be, you know, very valuable to place value on what German has also placed in the system. So I have connections in real estate, means I could bring those connections to impact German's, you know, material capital, which are tools, building, and infrastructure. And there is a point of connection where a value or, you know, a percentage of value of the token could be denoted to that based on how much connection I'm bringing and how much, you know, material German is also bringing into the system. Same thing applies for the rest of the forms of capital and currencies that we have. I could bring a song, a ritual, or a kind of like a story that is very valuable to a community that I have, and someone else could bring money in return for that. Someone else could bring ideas, knowledge. Someone else could bring the experiential capital as action for that. Someone could, you know, put intentions, prayers, faith, and karma into that, in a sense that that value that is possessed in that story or song or ritual meant for community has been amplified to a level where, you know, it's been embodied in all the forms of, you know, capital. So it's kind of like creating a variation in a system that, you know, holding too much money does not mean you own the world. It only means you are also holding something that's valuable as what I also have. So I think that should actually give us a framework as to how things are going to work on the proposal that German, you know, has drafted. Is completely doable. We only need to find the, you know, and the loopholes that could be there, you know, find those loopholes, close them up, and make the system more, you know, distributed and more evenly, you know, shared for everybody, or a whole system in a sense.
Beautiful, Derek. Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, in fact, you guys and gals are taking this much further than I had in what I was planning on just sharing. I was just sharing just kind of the basic conceptual framework that we can look at the world from the lens of the needs of people and planet and the assets of people and planet, right? They're not just physical and material assets. There's intellectual assets, ideas. Here, we're just gushing assets. We're recording it. So we're taking a kind of latent form of capital, ideas and dreams and whatnot. And when we mix them together, just like when you mix different chemicals together at a pharmaceutical lab, you know, suddenly you have a vaccine that can stop COVID. Oh my goodness, right? So here, this is like a laboratory of ideas and assets. We're generating all these super valuable assets just by mixing up our ideas together. But anyway, so but here's where I want to go. So but let me just share a little bit more about the framework, kind of where I'm going with this, and then we can see where the conversation goes from there. So let me screen share once again. Screen sharing, and we are recording. We can pause recording at any time, by the way. Just say, hey, Jamin, please pause, or do the pause symbol. So again, now I'm going to show the same matrix of needs of a whole world, WW for whole world, and the whole world's assets. Okay, so here's this matrix, and there's, you know, currently all these flows, all these diverse flows of assets to needs, in some in sustainable ways, others in unsustainable ways. So assets and needs. Now I'm going to show that same matrix, but sort of more laying down on its side, as you'll see why in a second. So we have needs and assets, and we have a current sort of mapping. And imagine that this mapping that we're doing, you know, an alien with a high-powered telescope looking at planet Earth, watching us, could do this mapping, right? It's just analysis. It's just saying, oh, okay, this is what's happening. Okay, they're chopping down these trees so they can make this furniture and make this grazing land so that these McDonald's customers can order Big Macs. Okay, got it, right? No judgment necessarily, just analyzing what's happening. So let's say that let's call this M1. We have matrix 1 is this analysis, just analyzing what's happening. Well, imagine that we meet here on Zoom and we come together and we bring more of us together, and through this whole network of conversations that we're putting up on the Chrysalis calendar, right, that over time we're able to say, hey, there's a whole different way that we could be both defining and meeting needs, a whole new, you know, structuring of needs for people and for planet, and a whole different way of looking at our assets. And through the different kinds of capital, like what Derek was talking about, we can learn about assets that we didn't even know we had, right, that we can tap into. Okay, great. Anyway, so with this, we create a whole new matrix with whole new relationships between assets and needs that's much more holistic. Let's call this M2, okay? So far, we've identified very clearly 2 dimensions, needs and assets, okay? What I'm proposing now is that there is a 3rd dimension that we can think about, which is this dimension here, and I'm simply going to call this the dimension of evolution. Okay, how do we evolve from one assets needs matrix to another? But before I do that, first let me welcome brother James from Ireland. Let me welcome James. James, brother, welcome back.
Hi, Jamin.
Hey,
All right.
great to see you, James. Yeah, we're recording, and it was pretty cool here a minute ago, but you know what? With you here, now it's perfect.
Carry on, man. I won't disturb.
Thanks, James. Thanks. And thanks for being sensitive. All right, so we have this assets needs matrix, M1 being kind of the current manifestation of the relationships between assets and needs. Through a lot of work, let's say we come up with a whole different formulation, M2, a whole different matrix. How are we going to make the shift from one matrix to another? And I'm introducing a third dimension. So we have needs is one dimension, assets is another, a third is evolution. So how are we going to evolve from one matrix, from one set of relationships on the planet to another? And I'm going to propose that this evolution dimension could in turn have the following parts. And this is all very conceptual and nonlinear, et cetera. But just imagine we're able to slice this dimension up into the following parts. I would propose that if we're going to evolve, right now the evolution of the planet depends very strongly on humanity. We used to be this tiny little species that was just kind of this predator species competing with a bunch of other predators and not really making much of a difference. We're way beyond that now. Whether we're going to survive or perish as a planet, not just humanity, very much depends upon humanity achieving something I'll simply call togetherness, right? Can we come together to intentionally drive our own evolution? Not just the evolution of humanity, creating super organisms like we're doing right now through collective intelligence coming together, but the evolution of the entire planet, right? And I believe that if we're going to do that, so the first thing is come together. That's like step number one. How do we come together? How do we come together? Here we've come together, right? But half the time when we come together, we fight, we conflict, we this, we that, and we end up breaking apart. So how do we come together? How do we stay together? How do we work together? How do we play together? How do we co-create together? How do we invite others to come join us? So togetherness, it's just one facet. Let me throw some more facets on the table. So let's say we're able to succeed at coming together, all right? And we want to drive evolution. Okay, great. The very next thing we need to do is we need to figure out this thing called spiritual transformation, right? A transformation of the human spirit. There's a lot of Zoom meetings that get together and they get together to say, okay, how do we make more money? Right? Here we're coming together to say, whoa, 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 whoa. How do we save, heal, and transform life on Earth? Starting with our own spirits. What is the game we're playing? What is the objective? What's the goal? Is it to hoard, hoard, hoard and pump up our egos and our bank accounts and our physical assets? Or are we here to really radically transform? So again, first we got to come together. If we're not together, then none of this is going to happen. So we got to come together. Then we got to, work on this.
If I may, on that topic, quick note. Yesterday, Ringo noted that "Come Together" was his favorite Beatles song. So thank you, Ringo. You're always on top of it. Peace and love.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ringo. All right. So again, togetherness. And again, I'm just kind of chunking out this whole new dimension called evolution and intentional evolution. So spiritual transformation. So let's say we do this. We get together and we figure out this whole spiritual transformation, and it's all deep and really profound. And we have philosophers and theologians and Buddhists, and we all come together and mix it up and really kick some butt here. Okay, great. So now spiritual transformation. What's our next challenge? We need to bring it down to earth and bring it to the world, right? That's story. We're a species that runs on stories. Derek, you mentioned stories as part of cultural capital, right? So how do we break it down to a story that we can just tell so that every kid, every elder, every Bill Gates, every government employee can say, wow, a new story for humanity that really just grabs you and you fall in love with, and you say, that I can do. Okay, great. So we take this new story and, and that's all well and good. All this is well and good, right? But how do we then take that story and do something very tangible with it? And the tangible step I'm going to propose, and this gets back up to the matrix model, is that we actually design M2. We need to design M2. one of these days we're going to have to take a break and spend an hour and a half watching this documentary called Unlocking the Mystery of Life or something like that. It's absolutely brilliant. Great graphics, great folks they interview. And it's essentially about intelligent design, this notion that life was actually designed. So we certainly have the capacity to redesign our world. As I look in Eric's background there, I see televisions and complex machines and brilliant architecture and furniture. All this was designed. We have the capacity to design a new world. But again, if we're going to do that, and Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, I've got to say this third dimension of evolution and designing M2, you're losing me a little bit. This is starting to feel like human hubris, feeling it can impose its complicated structures on the natural world and make it work. And as I say, I like the initial thing, but now, because you see, the thing is, between any M1 and M2, there are actually an infinite number of steps that take place between those things, right? And so designing the next step, actually there's a gazillion steps in between, most of which you're unaware of, right? The complexity is beyond. And so yeah, there's something about the next step, right? You can see, you can choose the next step. You can't choose the step after that. Not yet, not until you've taken that step. You know what I mean? Something like that. Go ahead, Jen.
I gotta say, I'm 100%. Sorry, 100% with Eric there. I think your first two steps are so essential and vital. Once those steps are taken, because the problem is not with knowledge or the ability to design. We've got that and we're not acting on it. So the problem is having the spirit and the heart and the togetherness. Once we have that you don't need to design. The designing will happen immediately, straight away, because all the human beings are, once the human beings are on the project, and most of the designing is about curtailing and managing ourselves. It's not about interfering with the planet, because when we give life a chance, it has its own emergent ways of settling as soon as we know to back off, or we can manage ourselves. So I think the designing is all about managing ourselves, really, and I think that will come. That I don't think that's the problem, and that's why I have an issue, I suppose, with Derek. Apologies, Derek, to you. I'm going to suggest that using the terms currency for some of these really, really important social things that we do is to impose a terminology. Everything you say is right, but to use the term currencies to impose a terminology of limited supply, because that's how our currencies work. This is how our cash works and how our currency supplies work. So I think using that terminology for these vital activities and the notion of tokenizing it, I think for me, it seems really, really risky path to take. I'm not saying 100% it wouldn't work, but I think we're in very dangerous waters with using that sort of terminology, despite the fact that everything you said in terms of us using those things is super, super important. Yeah, that's all I've got to say.
Very good, Jen. This is Michael. Thank you. I might say that evolution can be speeded by major events, positive events, like a major concert can change people's lives and minds and can change the world. We can get our story across by mixing it with building community and having music, arts, cannabis, all our wonderful things. So we can create a major splash. Maybe this fall we can do it, and we can announce to the world these stories.
Thing is, though, you can't design the impact that it's going to have on people, right? When people go to a concert or to an art gallery or whatever, they will have a reaction to it, right? But you can't actually design what the reaction is going to be, right? That is outside of the grasp of the creator of the piece of art.
Yeah, but experience artists through the experience of a concert, the experience of a Burning Man festival. There are people who are experienced in designing events, designing processes. I mean, churches have been doing it for centuries. festival organizers, artists, curators. There is a huge creative. Yes, you can't say it's going to happen like this, but you can have a fair idea it's going to trigger a lot of good stuff.
So I agree. I agree with everything that we've just said right now. And the reason why I mentioned about currency is that is the only that's the only language we understand right now, right? The conversation we are having right now is something that the world hasn't experienced in this reality yet. What we're trying to achieve with this, the world hasn't experienced this yet. But then to communicate that well, you have to put it in a context where they could also see that from the view that you're seeing it, but then introduce or reintroduce them to the story, right? But then when we look at the point where we
Derek, you're on mute. You accidentally muted.
Sorry, I thought I was speaking. So what I said was I agree with everything that we said, right? And the reason why I said currency, the currency was basically to communicate exactly how, the language we understand right now, because what we are proposing right now, the world has not yet experienced this in this reality. They might have achieved this, maybe civilizations before us, but then in this current reality, they don't understand this language or this story that is coming about. But then for us to communicate that well, you need to put the people in a position where you speak their language and then reintroduce them to the story where they can now identify and now speak that same story in the language that you want them to speak that story in. Now, at the concept of designing, I agree that, we can't design the stuff. And although, in this reality, there are people who could design and, structure how your interactions are going to be with the framework that they are designing is being done with, I'm a data scientist, so I could tell you that it's been done, right? There are people who could build frameworks and predict the outcome and the behavior that you are going to put out based on that framework and based on the things that they are pulling out from your consciousness. Now, when we talk about the designing aspect, there are infinite possibilities before we reach that part of designing. But in those infinite possibilities, we could see that there is at every step of evolution, we have to apply the story over and over and over and over again. Just like when you take the concept of infinity, you cannot get to infinity, but you get closer to infinity. It's just kind of like the same thing. What we are proposing is kind of like getting closer to God, right? Or getting closer to the source. But you can never, ever, ever get closer to the source, because in getting closer to the source, there are infinite possibilities of ways or infinite points that you want to get to. So an example, moving from 1 to 10, you have to move through 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? But then when you're moving from 1 to 2, there is 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.45, all those kind of things before you even get to 2. But then it's all built into the framework, or an intelligent framework. So it all gonna start with, the first 2 steps, togetherness, coming together, staying together, being together, building together, understanding ourselves together. And then we move from that point to where, we start sharing the story. Now, in sharing story, you're going to see there are different stories that are coming from different places. But all these stories, they have a correlation. Every single story has a correlation. No religion that we are currently experiencing in the world would state that killing is good. No religion has stated that. No religion has stated that stealing is good, or doing all those sort of things. So you will see that there is a pivot, like a turning pivot, where every human being on this single planet can converge to at a certain point in time. So that pivot.
What was the last point? I'm sorry, I didn't hear it. The very last
Yeah,
thing.
I said there is a pivot, right? That every single human being in this world would tend to or converge to. And that
converge. Yeah.
Yeah, and that pivot is what we are looking for at the moment before we move from that step from story.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Pivot, pivot. Thank you, Jen. Thank you for that. Beautiful. I love this conversation. And by the way, I kind of feel like as I'm laying out these parts of the dimension, I'm overlaying my own story on top of that. And I think that's what people are reacting to. Design is important, right? Whether it's simple, incremental, or big, holistic, those are finer points that we can talk about. I'd like to get back to the dimension itself, and I will in a moment. But first, Anonymous has something to add. Go ahead, Anonymous.
I had a good pivot, but it really depends on whether you want to like start getting back. Okay, I'll just say it real fast, like I usually do. Addressing the idea of like, currency and value. I think a really great example, which is, ongoing right now, is the Stanford, cryptocurrency, like that they're raising, and like instead of like, going through it technically, how it works is they're rolling it out in 3 stages, and the first stage, after explaining it, is that they need to show that, that people have an interest in this product. And so, at the moment, people are, collecting, these numbers, which it's clearly stated is not a currency. They don't have dollars represent money, but the fact that there's 10,000 like usually.
I don't know about anybody else, but I'm really struggling to make out what you're saying. Is it just me, or is this sound quality very generated?
It's not just you, Eric. Anonymous, you're totally jumbled up. If you could put it in the chat, that would be awesome. Yeah, he might be reconnecting here. Anyway, in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and take the talking feather and just continue on what I'm developing here. Derek, did you have something you wanted to add? Oh, no. No. Okay, it's cool. Okay, so look, again, these are just elements of it, and please pardon whatever story I throw on top. Togetherness, spiritual transformation, story, design. From design, we can now say, okay, we want to design this, whatever it is, incremental or holistic, whatever. To get that design implemented, we need a strategy, right? And the strategy is intimately connected with story. In a way, it's kind of like story, but in much more practical terms. Okay, great story. Now, how are we going to do it? We need a strategy. So that's a strategic piece. Strategy then gives way to plan, and plan gives way finally to action, right? And this is something that is one of the biggest complaints to these meetings that we have, is that after all is said and done, there's a lot more said than done. But I believe that in order to achieve anything, we need to, and this will sound like a little bit of a summary because it is, we first need to come together. And then we need to figure out the foundations of whatever transformation, which is spiritual by its very nature. Let's tell stories about it, stories from the past, stories from the future, our imaginings, our dreams. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about all this. Then let's design something, figure out how we're going to implement it in the world from a high level. That's strategy. Strategy is the highest level. Once we figured out a design, then we go to plans, and finally we take action, right? Anyway, those for me, that's how I think about it. But again, the important thing is framework here. I'm not saying, oh, my framework, it should be this. That's not what I'm arguing for. I'm just giving an example of framework, right? So that we can all talk about framework when it suits us. So again, the 3 dimensions that I'm proposing, needs of all of us in the world, human and non-human, assets, What are the assets of the world? What's the relationship between the two? Oh, we want to change that? All right, we need to evolve. What are the elements of evolution? Here's how I see it. How do you see it? Michael has his hand up. Go for it, Michael.
Well, I may be in a unique position to add to spiritual transformation through a new book called From Angels to Zanzibar, which my late friend Tom Burnett wrote with friends of ours, including my brother and sister-in-law, who wrote the introduction for it. I happen to write the forward for the book, but it's printing. It's at the press right now, and it talks about angels. It talks about love, energy, how atoms can carry intelligence, and it changed my life. So I'm hoping that others will give it a read. Maybe it can be a transformative book. It's 120 pages. But I'm not selling books here, but I think that this type of work comes into play at various times of history. These types of works just happen. This is a channeled book, by the way. So I just wanted to add that it is cutting edge, but I will be glad to share a copy of books when it comes out to any of our circle. As I had a hand in publishing it, but I can give the book out at very low rate. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Beautiful. So, oh yes,
there's
Eric,
something about this framework that's troubling me, Jamin, in its linearity. It feels like evolution is a cyclical process, right? Constantly revisiting, adapting, updating, constantly revisiting. So there's feedback loops required in this framework. And I still have my primary objection that I raised before about the what's the word I'm looking for? Excessively logical, something like that, right? Excessively ordered, something like that. I can't quite find the language for it, but the excessively planned, there we go. That's something like that. Excessively planned, something like that. There's not enough spontaneity and room for emergence, and too much sort of formula creation. So you see that I just going back to what Jen was saying before, like the togetherness and the spiritual transformation, and I can't remember what was the next step after that.
Story.
Yeah, and story as well. So that's the meat, right? And then the rest emerges from that, right? It doesn't need to actually be discussed, planned, talked about all that much. That's the soil. So the job is to enrich the soil and allow that which will grow to grow from that, nutrient enriched soil. Something like that.
Yeah, we don't forget we have Trove, the great toolbox of Trove to build upon, with the Chrysalis calendar meshing with that to be a practical assistance to our progress.
Michael, I didn't hear what you said, that we have the what? What was the thing you said at first?
Trove. It's a platform called Trove, formerly Catalyst. Vincent Arena, who we've met and worked with through Ecolab.
Yeah, I know. Beautiful. Yeah.
So let me get back to where I was ultimately going with this. And Ian, it's not to promote my framework or my way of seeing the world, or heaven forbid, my story that I overlay on top of that, linear or otherwise. No. I'm promoting framework generally, right? And I'm giving just an example of a framework, right? And I'm sure we can improve, come up with totally different frameworks. All that's good. Here's what I'm suggesting. So now we've explored 3 different dimensions of looking at global transformation: needs, assets, evolution, the different parts of evolution, et cetera, et cetera. So imagine that Jamin's framework is totally discarded, right? And greater minds prevail, and a really enlightened framework emerges, okay? And let's say it's 7 dimensions instead of 3, okay? Just imagine that on the Chrysalis calendar, which shows all these different meetings on all these different dates and times with topics and descriptions and everything else, you're also able to see where in that enlightened 7-dimensional framework, boom, where this meeting exists, where it lives within that framework, right? And so imagine that togetherness survives, and it's part of the ultimate framework, if you will. Not that there needs to be only one, but let's say that togetherness is something we all agree to. And yes, we need to focus on that first, because hey, until we get together, there ain't going to be nothing. And then let's say that people are able to then say, hey, okay, of all these great meetings, I want to apply this filter. Show me the ones that address togetherness. And then they're able to see all those meetings that in one way, shape, or form address togetherness. That's kind of where I'm going with this, right? Is that we start to think in terms of framework. Not that we've got the great framework now, but let's talk about framework. Let's debate about it. Let's say, hey, I don't like that part about your framework that you're putting out there, boy. This whole linear piece. It all sounds way too American to me, right? So, what about this? What about that? Great. Let's talk framework. Let's work on it. Let's come up with even a preliminary framework, or even multiple, right? Because once we have all these events up on the Chrysalis calendar, you can look at it through this lens, through this other lens, through this other lens. I'm just saying, I'm promoting frameworks generally. Go ahead, Jen.
So Eric will probably chip in as well. So we play this thing called the glass bead game, and we've been doing it for some time now. We've had a lot of discussions about topics, and really topics are the frameworks that we've been playing with, and I'm kind of hoping to get a project going with the glass bead game where we've got kind of a core set, but I'm not 100% happy with the core set. I think there could be some things in there that aren't in there, and some things perhaps shouldn't be in there, but kind of having this kind of core framework of discussion. And I was talking with some friends recently about creating a personal journal that kind of everyone uses as their framework, so they understand where they are, they understand perhaps where they still want to inquire, or where they want to have a look into things, or curiosities, also things and insights they've had. Because I go to so many fabulous meetings, and I don't actually have a way of, and I have a shit memory, so I don't have a way of kind of organizing the stuff, and chronologically won't work for me because that's not how life is. Topics don't. So some kind of topic-based journaling. And I spoke to someone who was kind of talking about that in the Kiko lab. So kind of must meet up with him again and have a chat about it. So it's having a topic framework that's really, really meaningful. Absolutely getting to the key topics we need to talk about, we need to think about, we need to get wisdom in. But then also relating it to the individual and their individual pursuance of insight and understanding, and kind of building that kind of stuff. I don't know if Eric got anything to say about that.
Yeah, I would say the Trove, I think Trove has an aspect where you can build in your bio, whatever you want the world to know about your background. And I have a 2-page bio I use and I provide to people sometimes, not real private, but just a background where I'm coming from. I find that's helpful to build a bridge. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it occurs to me that just togetherness, right? I mean, if let's just say, as Jamin suggested, just for the sake of argument, right? Let's say that we all agree that figuring out ways to come together, deepen understanding between ourselves, collaborate more effectively, blah 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 blah. That is necessary step one, right? So rather than, this is what I was saying before, right? Rather than looking at the next step and the next step and the next step after that, let's give all of our concentration to actually meaningfully making progress in step one, right? And what does step one, because every step is in itself a series, an infinite series of smaller steps, right? And so, you know, if we're saying that, right, the chunk we are choosing to address is togetherness, right? How does that chunk down into meaningful, addressable things? And, you know, immediately, two things that come to mind is, you know, relating, conflict resolution, you know, clarity of communication, you know, these sorts of things, brave spaces or safe spaces, whatever you want to call them, right? All of these are aspects of what it takes to more effectively come together, right? And so let's give all of our attention to step one, more effectively coming together, before even thinking about what we now think of as step two, because actually during the process of coming together, most likely we'll figure out what the actual next best step is once we've, do you know what I mean? And so, you know, I really feel like, you know, isolate the first step, go all in on that. And then once you're into that and you've made some, then the next step will emerge, you know, the clear next step will emerge from that.
Love it, love it, love it. Thank you, Jen. Yes. And Derek, you had your microphone unmuted a moment ago. Feel free to jump in. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Jen and Eric. So to make an example, right? Clubhouse is a very, you know, is an example of what this type of framework is, but not in what we are trying to talk about. But with the structure that Clubhouse emerged or merged into, right? It wasn't what it was intended to be, right? It was just supposed to be just like any social app. But then Clubhouse became something more than just a social app. What Clubhouse brought was people, intention, story, revelations, understanding, knowledge. It brought so many things with it. It brought even it brought the evil with it, right? But now take Clubhouse as that framework that we're looking for and remove all the, you know, the structures that exist currently. And now we are trying to fit in back every single structure we are talking about here. We start with building togetherness. We have a very broad social space where we have people coming in and we have topics, because Clubhouse basically run on topics. Topics run the world right now. Clubhouse topics run the world. Every single topic you are seeing on Clubhouse is something that is happening in real life, that somebody is experiencing. It's something that somebody is currently going through right now. Someone else, the world is going through.
You're breaking up a bit there, Derek. You might want to turn off your camera so we can channel it through audio. Go ahead, Derek. Back to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Please, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Thanks, Derek. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm saying, you know, every human being has that aspect, or it's kind of like a Lego, right? And all of us on this planet are Legos of, you know, human evolution. But then a Lego will not make a meaningful picture if it's not brought together, right? If you don't bring all the Legos together, the appropriate shape, the appropriate form, you don't get that picture, that beautiful picture that you might call an art. You don't get that. Now, every single human being is a Lego. Now, take for example, all these Legos that you're seeing, they've been damaged at one particular point. And some Legos have the tools to mend the Legos that are damaged, right? And now we've dumped all these Legos into one particular space. Now, for me to be able to heal, or for someone to heal me, or for me to heal someone, I need to know where that person is coming from. That means their story. And if I'm able to tell my story based on a topic that is being discussed in that space, and somebody in that space. So it's kind of like the topics attract the people. That's why when you go to Calabar House and you see people talking about topic, you see people who connect instantly that, oh, I can get you this, I can get you to that person, I can get you this. Now, if we put all these things as the structure and the framework from the beginning, that togetherness has been, accomplished. Now we apply spiritual, observations and attainment. How do I see the world? How do I see the world coming, alive, after me healing or after me healing someone? How do I see you, coming alive after all this process? Then we move forward to the next step, which is creating a general story of how we overcame during that healing process, of how we overcame, helping someone heal out. And then in telling of that story, you see you are pulling other people, other Legos outside of that space who also relate to different set of topics, different set of experiences, different set of stories that are even familiar. I could say, I lost somebody this in this situation. Somebody will say, yeah, that same thing happened to me. But I am able to heal from that. You don't. Now, how do I help you heal from that? And that is how the framework goes at this point on these 3 steps that, is agreeing to, and we all are agreeing to before moving forward to, seeing how those things evolve. I'm done. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Beautiful. I love this conversation. My goodness. Jen, you wanted me to share the sketch again, right? And Derek, if I screen share something, that's not saying, hey, stop talking. All that means is I'm just sharing a sketch. That's all. And Jen, go ahead. I'm going to share a sketch while you talk, Jen. Go ahead.
Yeah, because I wanted to have a look at it, and it just occurred when it flashed up on the screen. I suddenly realized something, of course, because we're looking at this in a linear way. Of course, it's not the slightest bit linear, is it? We've got human beings who are getting into the togetherness frame. Some people have been there for a long time, but it's just we're gathering more and more, and that spiritual transformation, the storytelling will come out of that. So some people will be on the train, as it were, way ahead of others. So in a way, we're kind of flowing through the whole thing, and it's not a line or a graph like that. It's a kind of cyclical thing with more and more joining into kind of a spiral as the togetherness grows. As there's more togetherness, more will get drawn in. There'll be more spiritual transformation, which will result in stories being told, which will then support the designing. As others may just be starting the togetherness, while some are perhaps starting to design. So I suppose it's I could sit. I mean, we've got paper and we tend to write things out in flat ways, because the realities are just like hugely complex and swirling and emergent and really, really messy. But I think the flow of this is, yeah, that's what needs to happen. But I don't think we need to plan it, as Eric was saying. Absolutely with him on that one.
Beautiful, beautiful.
I think so, sorry
Thanks for
to
sharing.
jump.
Yeah.
There is a level at which planning is effective, right? What is it? There's a really good plans. That's right. Plans are useless, but planning is essential, right? Something like that. Yeah. It's a really cool saying. So, planning, but being fully aware that your plans are not going to work out as plans, but using the plan as a framework from which to adapt your plan, that sort of thing, right? So there's this. I'm just gonna. Can I screen share? No. Can you let me?
Yeah,
screen
totally.
share a moment.
1 second, Eric. Yep.
Some of you will probably have seen this before. I mean, I show it quite often.
You're good to go,
But
Eric. You can share.
This notion of, where is it? Where is it? I thought I had it up. Oh yeah, there it is. There it is. No, that's not it. Sorry, that's not it. Oh, bollocks. Hang on, let me just find it. I thought I had it up. I do have it up. Oh, that's
I only read page 3 of that contract. Can you air that contract again, please? Just kidding.
I don't understand why it's not in the options to screen share. I do have it open. I don't understand why that screen is not available to me.
Can I offer you some coaching? Eric?
Turn off everything else. Yeah, let me just turn
Oh.
off everything else.
Okay, but let me offer you some coaching when you're ready.
Huh. All right. I've never had this happen to me before. No entiendo el problema.
Mira, yo te ofrezco asesoría, pero cuando tú gustas y cuando tú digas.
Anyway, guys, carry on. I don't know what the fuck's going on. I'll keep trying to find it, and if I do, I'll jump back in.
Fair enough, fair enough. Michael has his hand up. Or is that, anyway, Michael's off screen.
There we go. There we go. Finally.
Yeah,
There we go. So yeah, I mean, Jamie will be very familiar with this. I think I may possibly have shown this to you before, Jamie, and I'm not sure. But this is a different framework, right? This is a cyclical framework. And I mean, you could divide it up, but the point is the cyclic nature of it, right? Going round and round and round, repeating the same steps over and over again, building on what has gone before and progressing each time you go round and round the cycle. And so, I mean, this is for collaborative action, right? And so that's the forza. But this could just as well be divided up into, say, I don't know, I'm trying to think of 4 ways to subdivide togetherness into a sort of cyclical thing which continues to enrich the process of togetherness, right? So something like gatherings, games, I don't know, collaborations and celebrations, something like that, right? And that iterating that cycle over and over and over again enriches togetherness on a grand scale, something like that. And so, you know, that the linearity of that map before has now built into it a cyclical thing, right, within each domain, and, you know, bringing domains together, right? So yeah.
That's really good, Eric. That's wonderful. I was going to talk on the same topic. I said we could create our own church. My friend created the church, the Church of the Holy Smoke. It's a cannabis oriented church. For example, we could ask people to spend an hour every week with our church. And nothing wrong with creating our own church. You know, everybody, you know, most major people have done it, you know, but we could, that way people could attend our event religiously, so to speak, over.
A religion that isn't a religion.
I'm just hanging out with stoners. That's all that's happening here.
Yeah, I think Michael's worse than I am.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Brilliant stuff, everyone. I'm just loving this conversation.
So if you don't mind, I'm going to actually drop out for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, because Glass Bead Game's coming up and I want to have something to eat.
Very good.
And make a cup of tea and stuff beforehand. So
very good, very good.
Same with me, actually. I'm going to just nip out.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll be back in 10 minutes or so and relieve you of the chair, Jamin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very good. We'll see you in a few. All right, we continue to record. I would like to share a little bit about, actually, Derek wrote some cool stuff in the chat. I'm just going to read it. Planning being essential in the sense that it reminds us of where we want to go, but also being consciously aware that we have no expectation of that plan working, but main focus is steered on constant evolution. And then he writes gathering, conversation, revelation from Eric's good sharing. Yeah. And yeah, so planning is, in a sense, it's an illusion, because, how often do we ever create what we plan, right? But anyway, I also liked what Eric said about that planning is useless, but it's essential. So I forget, it doesn't, anyway, I think I've made my point. I'm just kind of rehashing other people's points at this point. Let me go ahead and screen share from the email that I sent out last night. Anyway, I talk about, this order, this framework, right? And again, I'm not promoting my framework, I'm just promoting the idea of framework. But as a framework, here I write the 7 facets of evolution, which is what I showed in my messy handwriting. Here above here it is in kind of a cleaner form. And then I say, the starting point of all this is togetherness. Let's focus on that. And even a preceding point to that togetherness is, how do we find each other? How do we imaginal cells even find each other to begin with, right? And how do we take the first steps towards coming together? And as we take these steps towards coming together, how do we organize ourselves across such facets as the 7 facets of evolution? The first step, finding each other, seems easy enough. There's so many platforms, communities, so many Zoom meetings, so little time. But what have we to show for all these meetings, right? And then I talk about some of the urgency that we need to focus on, and then I break it down into kind of a synthesis. We need to come together, organize ourselves, figure out the best plan, and then take the necessary actions across all relevant dimensions that we've been exploring.
Hello?
So let's say we've got the Chrysalis calendar. How do we go from the infinite menu of the Chrysalis calendar to identifying, AKA filtering, those things which are most urgent and important, and then organizing ourselves to make those happen? And I'm suggesting that a framework, a Chrysalis map embodying that framework, can help very much, right? So imagine we organize the Chrysalis calendar according to topics, in turn organized into a rich taxonomy, what I'm calling the framework. Here we've got needs, assets, and evolution, like I've been talking about earlier. And my hope is that as this order emerges and we kind of, use it as a tool, it will then become clearer and clearer where each imaginal cell, each of us, needs to focus, right? For the good of the whole, right?
Is there a pop quiz tomorrow? Is there a pop quiz tomorrow?
Yeah, there will be a pop quiz, so make sure that you've got all this memorized. And if you fail the quiz, you don't get to smoke ganja for a month. So anyway, that's the beginning of an explanation. And then what I wanted to also share is I go further towards the end of the email. I say, okay, let's take a helicopter ride upward. Let's go higher and higher in elevation. Michael, you might want to take a couple extra tokes here. So up we go, 100 feet, 1,000 feet, 10,000 feet, 50,000 feet. And now let's kind of look at the landscape beneath us. What do we see? Okay. So we got calendar, all right. We've got map, topic map, the framework that we've been talking about here, right? Another big one that we haven't talked about today is governance, right? And I'm just going to read from my own text from the email here. All these meetings are great, But where, how, when, why are we humans finally going to get together and collectively transform our politics and governance, not government, but governance, so that we actually do the urgent life-saving stuff? You know, Guy McPherson and Ye Tao are all cool in the gang, but like, it takes more than a couple smart professors to get the world to implement these amazing solutions. So let's talk governance. Okay, and then back to coming together. This is what I've been thinking a lot about for like the last week straight. So now I'm going to read what's highlighted in blue. Beacons, press conferences, and broadcasting via appropriate frequencies on the FM radio dial. Here's the deal. There are about 123 million people on the planet who each think they know what is most important and most urgent. I know because I'm one of them. Michael also is one of them. So is Eric. So is Derek. So is Jen. So are you. You too, Fiona. So we all think we know what's most important and most urgent. And we think we know how, when, where we need to get together to hear their message. Okay, great. Which of those 123 million people do we listen to? Well, the answer, of course, is me. Listen to me. Ha ha. So imagine that each of these 123 million folks instead embraced that they are only one in 123 million. And instead of singing me, 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 they instead started transmitting, think Twitter, what they have to say with zero attachment about who, when, how many folks will listen to them or fund them. That's a big shift, letting go of attachment. You with me so far? Okay, so now we have effectively 123 million beacons transmitting, but without attachment. And by dropping the attachment, they become better listeners as well. And they start connecting and doing what I call nearest neighbor networking of sorts. They start leveraging the Chrysalis calendar and the Chrysalis map. They start doing smarter broadcasting via the press conference. And they finally get their own unique band on chrysalis.fm radio, something that's under development. More on that later. And through all of these assets, they are able to reach exactly who they need to reach and connect with and talk with, all with a view to smarter collective sense making, including making sense of what we need to plan, design, and do. All right. And then the next bullet point, we're still in the helicopter ride, scoping the landscape. So far we've seen calendar, map, governance, beacons, press conferences, and broadcasting through this whole whopping paragraph. Then there's the new sexual revolution, which I put at the very end of the email, which is the same stuff I sent last week on that. Anyway, I thought that was appropriate. And then other cool stuff is just over the horizon, so stay tuned. Anyway, thank you all for indulging me on the latest share. And I see Michael has his hand up, so I'm passing the talking feather. We got 4 minutes till the top of the hour when Eric will rejoin us. And
yeah, just briefly on governance, my friend, my late friend Marvin created Earth Community. It's a group. It's Earth Community. We are already a part of it. We are already a part of it, and it's a membership across countries, across nations, just people governing themselves in a new group, overlaying division, where we build community through cannabis, humanitarian, social, environmental, peace causes like we're all about here. But I can develop that idea more in the near future and share it again. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. We got 3 minutes till the top of the hour, and we're still recording. Any more comments before we run out of steam here and shift to Eric?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Sister Ivy, go ahead.
I would like to thank you so much for that great email, and I want you to know that even if it was so late, I did read it, I didn't get to the videos, but I read that. Thank you so much. I think it's important that we all let you know that right into the wind, because I'm sure many of us read it. I certainly do, most of them. And thank you so much, because there's a lot of good in that.
Thank you so much, Sister Ivy. That really makes me feel good. Thank you. All right, 2 minutes till the top of the hour when Eric will lead us on the glass beads game. I will stop recording at that point. I'll only record if Eric and everyone wants me to record. Any other final comments? What an amazing session today. I am so happy and grateful. Passing the feather. Yes, Michael, go ahead.
No, I really appreciate all the work you're putting into it. I love the framework, the vision. It's a really good development. I think we made a lot of progress this week. And I'm looking forward to tomorrow, where we'll be able to hang out some more. Thank you.
I quite agree. And in fact, I'll be here later this afternoon, starting in about 4 hours from now, for the We Are Uno Food Healers Los Angeles segment. And yes, Sister Ivy.
No, I just said thank you, brother. I wanted to remind people about that, so thank you for that.
Yeah, and Sister Ivy will be here too. In fact, she is our leader of We Are Uno, and Sarah will probably be here as well. And that's all about action, the action of feeding everyone. Speaking of action. So anyway, feel free to join us for that. That starts in exactly 4 hours from now. I'm going to take a break starting in a little bit. I'm going to hang in there for some glass beads. For a bit, and then at some point I'll take a break, maybe in an hour or so. And it is now the top of the hour. So, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Thank you all. I have to leave, but I just wanted to say thank you all for taking the time.
You're welcome, and thank you, Sister Ivy. All right, I'm going to stop recording, and